we got some breaking news from the NFL world today. So, former Indianapolis Colts head coach, former Eagles offensive coordinator Frank Reich has now been hired by the Carolina Panthers.
Somewhere along those lines. Happy
I like
Halloween!
I like those glasses, dude. They're
Tonight's
nice.
gonna be a thriller!
Have I told you I worked at the World Series? It was my first year at the stadium. I went to Fanatics Fest, I went to Comic-Con, and I went to the World Series. It was my first year at the stadium, and the Yankees made it all the way to the World Series. Unfortunately, we lost 5 games to the Dodgers.
I said the Giants will be a perfect fit for John Harbaugh because you already established the quarterback situation. You already established the running back position. You already established the right receiver position, and you have the top 5 pick in the draft.
Todd Bowles, at best, is a mediocre coach. He did the same situation with the Jets back in 2015, ultimately maliciously ruining a power-hungry Baker Mayfield and potentially Mike Evans.
But Indianapolis ultimately came back, got the go-ahead touchdown. Then, at the end of the game, when Brady got the ball less than a minute, Peyton had his head down the entire time because he knew Brady had enough time. But the interception happened. It's funny. All of a sudden, Peyton Manning hears the crowd roaring. He finally looks up and starts jumping up and down real. Buenas noches, fanatics. It's Nikki Stees and Agent Warrior X. We're back for episode 7 of Everything on the Table. And we talked a little bit about March Madness last week. We even had Agent do his bracket. And now, this week, you know why I picked some upsets going into it. Because sure enough, they happened, folks. The defending champ Florida will not be returning to the Sweet 16. So it's over.
You know, the crazy thing about March Madness so far is that it's one of the craziest things. Ladies and gentlemen, play ball. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Agent Warrior X, a.k.a. Agent Warrior. And I'm back with another mission. You don't want to know why? I got my Yankee shirt on, my Yankees background, because tomorrow is opening day. Now, before we continue on with March Madness, we're going to do a little bit something like NFL pickup style. So I already have the matches set up for tomorrow's game. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, those who are joining in, welcome to episode 7. And let's get on to the matches. The first matchup, we have the New York Yankees versus the San Francisco Giants. This offseason, and by the way, the pitching lineup is Max Fried versus Logan Webb. The Yankees overall last season was really up and down because Garrett Cole last year was completely out for the year because he had a Tommy John surgery. The Giants, well, they took 2 out of 3 at our turf at Yankee Stadium, ultimately winning 2 out of 3. And now this year, both teams slightly did better in terms of the offseason, but I'm going to say that the Yankees barely did something this offseason, but as long as they have depth and their players coming back healthy, they'll be fine. But as of right now, Anthony Volpe's out until May. Garrett Cole is out until May. Rodon could be out until May. Schmidt could come back at August in the second half season. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to be honest with you and say give me the Yankees over the San Francisco Giants in the first matchup of the series.
I'll say this about baseball. One of my uncles puts it best. I really don't follow along till August when the season really starts, because that's when momentum actually matters in terms of who wins and loses, playoff seedings, and the World Series. Philadelphia Phillies 2022, 2024 are opposite examples of that. 2022, they got hot after firing their previous manager, went on a run to the World Series. 2024, it looked like they were going to run the table in the NL, but They got a little bit cold. They had to just squeak by to get in the playoffs. I don't remember who they beat to get in again.
I think they beat another team, but I don't know. The
But then
next game,
playoff time, they got beat. So that really shows
Yeah.
you momentum really picks up that time of year.
Yep. And then 2022 year, they made it to the World Series against I think it was the Padres. Then 2023 lost to the
The Astros.
Diamondbacks. That lost to the Diamondbacks in 2023. Then 2024 lost to the Mets. Speaking of the Mets,
Oh, yeah,
we have the Pittsburgh Pirates versus the New York Mets. Paul Skeens versus Freddie Peralta. I'm only gonna do like a couple games here, the primetime ones. So New York, the Mets has done quite a lot after losing Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. Pittsburgh has really improved on the depth situation, and of course, they have been really well. But the roster is going to look completely different. You have Juan Soto, obviously. You have Francisco Lindor, obviously. The newest members, Jorge Polanco, Bo Bichette, and of course, you still got Mark Vientos. But I'm going to say that Paul Skeens might outplay Freddie Peralta, but I am going to say that give me the Pirates over the Mets. The next matchup, we have on primetime, we have the reigning, defending, undisputed World Series champion Dodgers versus the Arizona Diamondbacks. Division rival matchup. The Diamondbacks lost Eugenio Suarez back to the Mariners. The Dodgers added a lot of key players. They've added Kyle Tucker. They've added Edwin Diaz to help the bullpen. But ultimately, I think the Dodgers will take this one. The next matchup I'm going to say is the Boston Red Sox versus the Cincinnati Reds. If Boston can play their cards right this season, they still have a shot to go back to the playoffs, but improve their record. You have Garrett Crochet versus Andrew Abba. So give me the Red Sox over the Cincinnati Reds. And then the final game, you got the Philadelphia Phillies versus the Texas Rangers. Nathan Eovaldi versus Christopher Sanchez. The Phillies were supposed to get Bo Bichette. There were rumors about that this offseason. Ultimately, he went to the Mets. They still got an aging squad still of Bryce Harper, Alec Baum, and Kyle Schwarber. I'm glad they re-signed Kyle Schwarber and JT Realmuto. But ultimately, I'm going to give it a buck and say that give me the Phillies over the Rangers.
I mean, it's interesting you brought some of this up because we were talking about the Seattle Mariners for a second. It's interesting because the city of Seattle has got some exciting news along the way coming in a few years. Back in 2008, they had their hearts ripped out when they lost their beloved Supersonics to OKC, and it looks like they're getting the Sonics back. The Thunder are going to give the rights of the franchise history up back to the new Seattle Supersonics, and looks like Las Vegas is going to get a team, most likely the Blackjacks, but the name hasn't been decided yet. And it'll be interesting because it looks like, you know what that means, they're going to have to do a realignment. It's going to be 32 teams, 4 divisions, 4 teams per division, just like the NFL.
Yep. Now, what about the tanking situation? Is it just going to be like similar to the NFL, or is it going to be like just basically the same thing, but the winners, the ones who aren't tanking will be rewarded? That's the question.
That's interesting. When it comes to expansion, I think the NBA's got to do it right this time. Let those 2 teams flip a coin for the number 1 and 2 pick, and then do the rest through the lottery if you want to still do that format. But you got to let the expansion teams go first. They made this mistake in 2004 by doing a lottery, which went to the Magic instead of just letting the Bobcats have the option to get Dwight Howard. They did this mistake with the Vancouver, now Memphis Grizzlies and Toronto Raptors, when they should have gotten flipped the coin for the 1 and 2 picks. And I think it happened before with the Heat. And was it the Heat or T-Wolves, or was it the Heat in the original Hornets? Something along those lines.
I think it was around the Heat and the Hornets. But to be honest with you, I'm going to say no way.
Okay.
Garrett Cole, the Yankees has just announced that Garrett Cole is ready to return for the 2026 season after a Tommy John surgery. I'm going to be honest with you and say that we need some help at some point. I mean, Max Fried on paper with the healthy squad, Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, and Garrett Cole are all elite pitchers. So now let's talk about the upsets, because you had a lot to say about the upsets about March Madness. This was by far the greatest March Madness we have ever seen since 99, around like 1999 or somewhere between. You had the defending champion Gators being knocked out by Iowa State. You had my Spartans, the Michigan State Spartans, going back to the Sweet 16 against Louisville. This was no surprise, because Mikael Brown Jr. didn't even bother playing at all, and Jeremy Fears Jr. actually looked really amazing. Now, this was no surprise because we know Duke advanced. We know that I said Michigan advanced. This was no brainer either. But to tell you the truth, this was by far the craziest matchup. And St. John's is by far the most surprising team. Remember how last season they were the third seed, and you saw that skid a couple weeks ago? This year is different. This is far different than the last year's March Madness.
Oh, yeah. And now St. John's has an interesting matchup coming up against Duke. Now, Duke is still the favorite, but with St. John's getting that upset, their stock increases, and they're going to be, until the final whistle, there's going to be that potential that they could win until they either do or until Duke lives up to expectations. Also, you got Texas beat Gonzaga, too. That was a bit of a surprise one. Tennessee, Virginia upset. So there's been a lot of them going on. And, hey, that's part why they call it March Madness, because when it comes to brackets and predictions, it's crazy in part. But, hey, that's what happens when you have a single elimination tournament. Sure, in a best of 5, a best of 7, anyone can win the first game, but the favorites can still win the series 9 times out of 10. But one and done in tournament, if the underdog wins just one time, it's over. And I started looking at some historical upsets I mentioned earlier on the 3-point blitz, just kind of like a quick Cliff Notes version of it. You had more recently FDU beating Peru back in 2023 when Zach Edey was the lead guy on Purdue. That's one remembered. Back to 2018, UMBC beat Virginia. Jarius Lyles scored 28 points in that one. You had the beginning of the end for Calipari, St. Peter's over Kentucky in 2022. You also had, Santa Clara in 1993, the number 15 beat number 2 Arizona. And most notably, Steve Nash was on Santa Clara and Damian Stoudemire was on Arizona. I know it's a little bit off subject, but speaking of Damian Stoudemire, Netflix, April 14th, they're releasing a documentary called The Jailblazers about the early 2000s Portland Trailblazers, an example of a team where discipline is more important than potential. Because they have.
You're right about everything. Everything you said about the 2000s Trailblazers. I know a lot of people said that the 2000s Trailblazers was really god-awful in every aspect. But the Jailblazers, in my opinion, I got to watch that documentary because Damian Stoudemire was one of the few star players there. This is before Damian Lillard, by the way.
With him, Rasheed Wallace, who eventually went to Detroit and won a championship over there. You had that point, though. They were up 3-2 in the Western Conference Finals against the eventual 2000 champion LA Lakers, but they blew that. even Shaq thought at the time that the Blazers would be a team they'd be competing against for a while, but eventually off the court arrest, technical fouls, fights, fines, suspensions caught up to them, and they slowly fell apart, and they didn't start to rebuild until, well, they kind of went to like a down point in the mid-2000s, got LaMarcus Aldridge, had him, Rudy Fernandez, had Brandon Roy, but then Brandon Roy's career was cut short, became a big what could have been. They had to get Damian Lillard, kind of an up and down history since, but talk about a wasted opportunity right there. That's what.
Speaking of wasted opportunities, the Nets had multiple opportunities and they had squandered. The 2002 NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, who eventually three-peated. Jason Kidd, in my opinion, was the most surprising one, in my opinion. The 2003 New Jersey Nets, back-to-back Eastern Conference champions, squandered that opportunity against San Antonio, led by Tim Duncan and of course Tony Parker. And then the first super team in the early 2010s, after one winning series against the Toronto Raptors, squandered the next one. And then finally, a 2021, what could have been a championship team, the big three with KD, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, ultimately falling short to the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, speaking of the Bucks, Cam Thomas got waved off again. This is by far one of the most surprising players. You know how some players say they had potential promises, right? If they develop properly, and few organizations didn't believe in that player because they cut short to different teams, but ultimately magically do better. This is one team that was actually hexed. Because I think, in my opinion, Cam Thomas got hexed badly. The Nets wasn't paying closely attention to Cam Thomas. Despite his injuries, I told him, get him some help. Get Cam Thomas some help before he got cut. But ultimately, the Nets organization forgot about that, and they moved on with him. And we warned the Bucks that, you know what? If you think that we're going back to the playoffs, good luck with him, because he's a ball hogger at most.
And if you want to talk about examples of discipline ruining potential, here's a recent example. The Memphis Grizzlies with Ja Morant. You've had Ja Morant, one of the best and most exciting players, all the promise in the world, but obviously off the court, lack of discipline's gotten in the way. Also, you had Dylan Brooks, who had some discipline issues, and even going into this year here in Phoenix, he's having his best season. It looks like he's finally going to get out of that shadow of just being Ja Morant's trash-talking lackey and break out as a star on his own. And then he gets arrested. It was either DWI, DWI, but still, at the worst time possible when you're going on a run, now you got this negative publicity behind you, man. Dylan Brooks has to get it together because he has the potential to really be a star for the future, but he's just got to get it together discipline-wise. You've seen what happened to Ja over in Memphis and how lack of discipline hurt him in the long haul. See Zion Williamson.
Him too. You forgot, besides the NBA, there are a few players that has fought the law. You had those players. You had, of course, Bill Romanowski. You had Antonio Brown at one point. Antonio Brown. You had, I think it was Alex Rodriguez, I don't know. But all I know is that, Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas. I forgot about him. He has a problem trash talking to Jordan, but he regressed over time.
But Isaiah Thomas, though, the one thing with Isaiah is he can at least say he won a couple championships in Detroit before the Bulls caught up to them. Something that Ja Morant has yet to accomplish. Something that those Trailblazers didn't accomplish. Rasheed didn't do so until he moved on to different ventures with the Pistons. Basically kind of as the number 4 guy in that big three behind Big Ben, Chauncey, Rasheed, but that's another interesting subject too, big threes, because People say that big threes are a newer thing, but if you look closer, they've always been in the NBA. Even in the 80s, you had 3 big threes: Sixers, Dr. J, Moses Malone, Mo Cheeks, Celtics, Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, the Lakers, Kareem, Magic, James Worthy, the Bulls, their second three-peat, MJ, Scotty, Dennis Rodman. It's always been in the NBA.
Hold that thought. Speaking of Dennis Rodman, he's inducted to this year's WWE Hall of Fame. Now, I know a lot of athletes go on some side quests, like you saw with Cam Scatterboo involving a Monday Night Raw with the Judgment Day. You had Lawrence Taylor at one point fighting at WrestleMania. You had Dennis Rodman himself. Dennis Rodman eventually joined into that conversation and want to become a few wrestlers outside of sports. Well, let's tell you the truth. George Kittle. George Kittle's another one too. He's still the best tight end, but I feel so sorry for his injury. But at the same time, these are perfect examples of athletes outside of basketball, football, baseball, etc., that have side quests like involving professional wrestling or boxing. Mike Tyson is another one too.
But yeah, and if you want to talk about some of the most successful, Dennis Rodman was perfect in the NWO. His persona, public persona, fit perfectly with that group. He was the perfect guy to use and cast as a partial member of the group through. What did he do? Summer of '97, but he did the summer of '98.
I think it was a 98. Yeah, summer of '98, and I think this was after the events. I think this is after the Bulls' second three-peat with Jordan Pippen and Rodman.
Yep, because DDP had met Karl Malone after one of the Rockets and Jazz games when they were in town doing an autograph session. They got tickets to the game. DDP says he met Malone, found out Malone was a fan, and that's how they eventually set up the deal to bring in Malone and Rodman after the NBA Finals. And then a year later, Rodman did a one-off with Macho Man, but by that point, Macho Man's best years were behind him.
Sometimes when it comes to WCW days, I know a good friend of mine who is a pro wrestling talk. I know his name is Michigan Mike, and he is by far an expert in terms of professional wrestling talk. So him and I go way back a couple months ago on the very first episode of Hardcore Balls. It was me, Pyro, and Michigan Mike. We were talking about John Harbaugh. We were talking about the minute. We were talking about the NBA trade deadline. We were also talking about how we even talked about our favorite topics for like 1 minute. We even talked about John Harbaugh after his termination. And then ultimately, it led up to this. Everything on the table with you and I. I will be here next week. But the next 2 weeks after that, I got work. So I'm going to be honest with you and say this. Come the next couple weeks, during the road to WrestleMania, speaking of pro wrestling, the next matchup I'm going to be mentioning is the tag team titles between the Usos and the Vision at the Garden Street Fight for the tag team championship. Now, a lot of people's been saying what happened to last night with Roman Reigns and CM Punk going at each other, but specifically Jey Uso wanted attention. He wanted Roman to whoop him so hard that he crashed out the hardest. Now, this is where Road to WrestleMania feuds builds up to be either a great outcome or one of the worst outcomes. Like this, for example, Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre won his WWE Universal Champion in the early of this year. And he, in my opinion, did his title reign dirty. I kid you not. TKO and WWE did his title reign dirty because the way how Drew McIntyre played, because he got involved in that match, in that Royal Rumble matchup, he got involved in the Elimination Chamber ultimately punished him to defend his championship, losing it ultimately. He quit the very next Friday night, and then after that, what happens? You guessed it. He went after Jacob Fatu in a never-ending brawl, which builds up to another potential Road to WrestleMania feud.
When it comes to the 2020s, they've on numerous times had this bad habit of prematurely ending title runs before WrestleMania. Drew McIntyre, they did it with The Miz, having him drop, I believe, to Lashley. Now, that would have been a great WrestleMania moment. Let Lashley go on a nice run, win it there, but they basically they pulled the trigger too early and took some of the steam off what could have been a great moment for Lashley. That's a problem they've had.
What's crazy about it is that some Road to WrestleMania builds up to great momentum, like the women's division. Now I got to talk to something about the women's division because now this is getting real interesting. Yes, you had Stephanie Valkyria and Liv Morgan still go at each other. You still Rhea Ripley facing Jade Cargill for the first time since what was the last? I think it was the first time ever. But when it comes to titles, like when it comes to Road to WrestleMania, here are the 3 golden rules you have to do. 1, develop the storyline and let it play out. 2, have their moments. Don't give up on their on developmental storylines early and let someone else take over. And 3, don't let these matchup grades fool you, because if they do, forget it. You basically just wasted someone's talent and potentially the potential on a build-up to Road to WrestleMania. You mentioned Bobby Lashley and The Miz back in 2020. You mentioned Drew McIntyre. We mentioned Drew McIntyre this year. What about John Cena back in 2017? God bless Bray Wyatt, by the way. Bray Wyatt did eventually win that championship Elimination Chamber, ultimately losing to Randy Orton.
That whole road, though, they just completely. I mean, I get okay, Bray Wyatt. I mean, John. It should have, if anything, that could have been the time to do Cena versus Taker, or maybe wait till WrestleMania to do that. Then at the same time, though, it's like they could have just done Cena Taker at Mania there, and then maybe afterward at like.
They did it at one point in 2018, though.
Yeah, they could have waited a few more months for Bray Wyatt, have Wyatt beat Orton in the blow-off, then have Wyatt get the title. It would have made it to a bigger moment later. Or maybe do Reigns versus Rollins for the first time, or Reigns versus Strowman at Mania 33. Just that whole card just really...
But what's interesting, though, is that some wrestlers becomes legends in WrestleMania moments. Like, for example, this year, we're getting Oba Femi versus Brock Lesnar. Now, at this point, I know Brock Lesnar has been around this industry for a very long time, but I'm going to tell you this right now. Oba Femi will win it. Someone has to pass the torch to another wrestler who eventually wins a championship. Like Bo Dallas. Bo Dallas is one prime example, is that despite winning an Intercontinental Championship, despite winning Tag Team Championship, the one thing that he never won is a major WWE championship. At some point in time, he needs to win a championship in terms of the men's division, because, or you could say Uncle Howdy. Uncle Howdy at some point needs to win a championship to honor Bray Wyatt's legacy. Now, if they don't, besides going after the tag team championships against MFT, forget it. This was by far the most wasted, talented factions I've ever seen. Now, no offense, because I know for a fact that I'm going to put it this way and say that some members need to win championships aside from Dexter Lumis and Eric Rowan. It's other members that need to win some titles too eventually, but it's depending on the booking from TKO and Triple H himself. So I'm not going to say that the Wyatt Six is the most overhated. I'm saying the Wyatt Six is by far now becoming just underrated. What happened to the to the Wyatts that I once knew back in 2013 for the glory days of that. God bless Luke Harper. God bless Bray Wyatt. Both of them are great. But ultimately, the Wyatt Six now carrying the torch to Bray Wyatt's legacy at this. At least try to go after some singles championships for once.
I mean, two things: character development, storyline buildup. You could look at the first Batista Triple H when Batista went face and left Evolution. Under the current booking system, that Elimination Chamber where they teased it by having Orton eliminate Batista, where they played it off as if Triple H could have helped, but he backed out of helping at the last second, teasing the idea that he wasn't really loyal to Batista in return. They would have had Batista win it there, but by waiting, having Batista win the Rumble, playing up his decision, it made for a more satisfying WrestleMania moment, and it helped Batista's character development in the long term. Even beating Triple H in his gimmick Hell in the Cell before they moved him and Cena to Batista to SmackDown, Cena to Raw.
Exactly, because Batista's development character helped out long term. Now I know for a fact that 2005 WWE year was amazing. Not because Batista beat Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship in WrestleMania 21. Not because the feud between Triple H and Batista developed really well, but specifically John Cena going to Monday Night Raw. This was by far the craziest. Now I know Eric Bischoff and John Cena did have some beef at one point when he first came to Monday Night Raw. But guess what? Chris Jericho overtime. In the short term, I think they really developed it really well. But in the short term, but long term, the long term of John Cena defending it more than just months worked out perfectly. Yes, Kurt Angle may have challenged him a couple times, but ultimately Cena came triumphant. But sometimes you gotta let the character develop really well over time. Like factions, for example. You mentioned Evolution. And we mentioned the Shield with Roman, Seth, and Dean Ambrose. They developed over time. It developed really well until 2014. Now the Wyatt Six, since they returned in 2024, over time, I'm starting to see this as a mediocre development because they, aside from the MFT feud, you gotta at least go for singles championships at some point or try to carry on his legacy. I'm not trying to be offensive though, but this is actually facts.
And you want to talk about character development through 2005. Two perfect examples. Edge, first he gets a win over Shawn Michaels at the Royal Rumble. Loses a street fight, but puts up a valiant effort, wins Money in the Bank, gets victories over the R. Kelly of WWE, Chris Benoit.
Yeah. Chris Benoit then eventually cashed it in the very next year in 2006 at New Year's Revolution against John Cena after the Elimination Chamber.
And then on SmackDown, Rey Mysterio getting a couple wins over Eddie Guerrero, an upset over JBL later that year, having a strong performance in the Survivor Series elimination match before getting ousted by Shawn Michaels, beating Shawn Michaels at the Eddie Guerrero tribute show, and then winning the Royal Rumble the next year. See, two guys that were actually built up properly to look strong before becoming champions.
Now, as far as the storyline concerned, I get it. I get those storylines between the Wyatt Six on the start. They started with Chad Gable. Now, I know why they started with Chad Gable because probably I really don't know, but I'm not going to say it. But they went after Chad Gable. Then they went after American Alpha. Then they went on SmackDown to terrorize MFT with Solo Sikoa. And then over time, currently, this is the situation we are. This, at this point, has become a mediocre storyline development. At least try to go after some singles championships. This is the third time I'm saying. For the singles championship, like the Intercontinental Championship, the U.S. Championship, the Women's Intercontinental Championship, the Women's U.S. Championship, hell, even the World Heavyweight and Universal Championship. They need to go after that too to honor his legacy. Heck, Bray Wyatt, even Bray Wyatt won major WWE championship during his career before he passed away.
both as Bray Wyatt then as The Fiend.
Yep. He eventually, this in my opinion was like the Joker of WWE. Specifically after he won the Universal Championship, but ultimately they did him dirty. I feel like they did him dirty at Crown Jewel, after Goldberg won.
They could have waited till WrestleMania and given Braun Strowman his moment there. And it would have had a storyline in place. Strowman, who was brought in storyline-wise by Bray Wyatt. Now, here's Strowman's payoff, finally getting to officially step out of the shadow of being Bray Wyatt's former lackey and getting his crowning moment.
And you know what? Over time, it paid off in 2020 until the horror show in the Firefly Swamp match. This is where Judgment Day arrives, because after the Fiend's returned with Braun Strowman came back and challenged the Fiend once more. And guess how that outcome turned out? The Fiend won, but ultimately got his ass kicked by Roman Reigns. But eventual returning Roman Reigns, which is essentially who became an eventual 1,000-day champion.
And I would say the wrestler of the decade by far.
I think, to be honest with you, speaking of Roman, this feud between CM Punk and Roman Reigns has by far the most potential storyline we've ever seen. Now I know he has the Usos with him. They're treating him like the blood. Like, you remember how he treated the bloodline with Jey Uso, and Jimmy, and Solo. I have a gut feeling Roman did him dirty, in my opinion. They did him dirty, in my opinion, but over time, he became a face again. Now he's a face again, and now he's facing CM Punk. He never won a World Heavyweight Championship in his career, but I will say he will win. I have a gut feeling about it.
And sometimes you got to strike while the iron's hot, because if you wait too long, either it never happens, Ryback, or when it does happen, it doesn't have the same impact it should.
The feud between John Cena and Ryback was a strange feud. It was a feud which I thought it was going to be terrible ever since after that Royal Rumble and the Shield feud back in 2013. Ultimately, it was strange because he challenged him to an eventual championship. This was the mistake they made back in 2011 with R-Truth versus John Cena. This was the mistake they made back when John Cena and R-Truth fought at Capital Punishment. Look how that turned out. John Cena won. He successfully defended the championship. R-Truth got nothing out of it besides winning the 24/7 championship. I think, in my opinion, some storylines are very strange, but at the same time, it's always about entertaining too.
Now, in a case of R-Truth, that was one of those, if you really weren't sold on him being a main eventer, you could have just had him go after a mid-card title, let him hold that for a while. Then when you found someone that was ready, have him drop it. Maybe just wait a little bit, play out Cena Miz one more month, then bring in CM Punk and do it that way.
You know, to tell you the truth, when it comes to storylines like these, the moral of this is that storylines build perfectly. You have to build a storyline that fits perfectly. Like Cody Rhodes winning the championship against Roman Reigns in the city of brotherly love. Heck, even Jey Uso beat his own brother too.
Yeah, and when it comes to WrestleMania, we've seen a lot of storylines that were built up really well. Brett and Owen, brother versus brother. Owen Hart got his big moment. Rest in peace to the late Owen Hart. You've had, like I said, Batista Triple H, the first go around, Mania 21. You've seen, even though it didn't have much of a story.
Heck, even John Cena versus JBL, that built up perfectly over time.
Another one, you go Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Mania 14, 1 year after Austin versus Brett, which I think was the initial plan by the summer of 97. But then when Brett signed WCW, they had to call an audible, and we got Stone Cold Shawn Michaels, which was the next best option. You kind of have to pay off Austin and Rock.
Yeah, that was going to say, ultimately went to Steve Austin and Rock, which is by far the greatest rivalries of all time, if not one of the greatest. Now, if you want to talk about my Mount Rushmore of best WrestleMania rivalries, this is one of them. Steve Austin and The Rock, Stone Cold versus The Rock, John Cena versus JBL. The third one, I'm going to say Triple H and Batista. And the fourth one I'm going to say is that John Cena versus Batista, 2010.
Oh,
It
yeah.
developed. It developed eventually great, but ultimately, on the short term, it really panned out kind of great.
But I mean, well, to be fair, Batista was leaving, so it made sense long term. But the buildup, particularly that promo Batista talked about the parallels between their rise, that set the tone perfectly for a big time WrestleMania match, years in the making. And then another one, Hogan Andre, WrestleMania 3. That was the perfect. It worked because back then you didn't have weekly shows. You usually had hour-long shows, so you had to rotate the lineup. So Hogan and Andre they were baby faces all that time. So you stretched out continuity with their characters as friends until Andre sides with Heenan, and you had a big story with Hogan begging him not to take Heenan's side. Andre doing it anyway. Andre was going to be the threat. Heenan thought he finally got his guy.
Exactly. But ultimately, over time, Andre the Giant ultimately turned on him. Now, if you want to talk about another one, I'm going to replace John Cena and Batista and say Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior was another great one.
Yep, absolutely. It was at that time. That was an example. You strike while the iron's hot. The iron was hot with Warrior, which was great in the short term. In the long term, he wasn't. Jim Hellwick wasn't the most professional guy in the world, and that kind of led to them scaling back to Hogan for a bit. Now, if you want to talk missed opportunities, you had Hogan Flair Mania 8. They didn't do it. Now, they got a good backup plan with Flair and Macho Man, but still, you got to pull the trigger when you have the chance because that was their last chance to do it at a Mania, and they didn't.
Which ultimately, by the way, was by far the most. You have to like execute it properly, otherwise it will go. It will still be good, but for future references, you have to pull the trigger at one point. Now let's talk about another topic because I have something to say about this year. Jay-Z has officially announced a 3-day tour, a 3-day concert at Yankee Stadium. It's a celebration of 30 years of Reasonable Doubt and 25 years of the first Blueprint. And then they had an extra day, which is called the extra inning. Ultimately, all these 3 shows are now officially sold out. Which, in my opinion, Jay-Z, I think Jay-Z at this point is the most overhated rapper of this current generation because of the situation with the Epstein files and the situation he was doing recently. But I'm not going to mention it even further, but he's a rock and roll Hall of Famer. Jay-Z is the greatest rapper of the 96 era before Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. were both passed away.
Now, that's a big deal at Yankee Stadium, right within the Brooklyn area. You know that's going to be huge with the locals, and that's going to be a draw. So, yeah, why not go for it when you have the opportunity to draw? And as far as Jay-Z being hated, now part of it does have to do, I think it was the Diddy thing that he was actually.
Yeah, that was back in '94, but I'm not going to say even further. So the moral of this is that you have some greatest rappers from like the 1980s to like the 90s. You could say Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. You could say Run DMC. You could say NWA. You could say any rapper from the 80s and 90s was peak amazing, especially Wu-Tang Clan. Rumor has it that if Wu-Tang Clan enters the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year, the the hip hop community is officially complete. You have some rappers or groups and duos part of that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. You have Salt and Pepper. Outkast was inducted. You have Run DMC, NWA, Dr. Dre, Snoop, Pac. Pac at one point got inducted, alongside ECE as well.
And as far as the Hall of Fames go, there's the only thing that's conflicting with the rappers going in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is because historically the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's been known for that particular genre. That they're going to have mixed perceptions of those music fans who like it, but then those rock fans that aren't necessarily fans of artists from a different genre going in. The best solution would be just have a Hall of Fame for hip hop, have a Hall of Fame for rock. Bam.
You mean like some?
Hold on a second, you're breaking up.
Jay-Z was right about one thing with. Oh, Jay-Z was right about one thing in terms of the his acceptance speech back in 2021. He said he looked at some genres like punk and rock. He looked up to some rappers like LL Cool J, Big Daddy Kane, and of course Rakim. Some of the famous rappers from the 90s was absolutely amazing. But what really inspired, I know a lot of people say Eminem should definitely be up there too, because his resume speaks for it all. A lot of people nowadays listen to Eminem, and a lot of people say that Nas should be also in there as well.
And that's another reason why it would be best. And it would actually be good for hip hop fans because now they get their own genres Hall of Fame. That creates more opportunity for names throughout the industry to get inducted, such as Nas, Wu-Tang, 50. You can put them all the big names in. And then the same goes with the Rock Hall of Fame. You still got your Nirvanas, of course. Pretty much your big four of grunge, easy get in if you separate them.
Heck, even Green Day should definitely be inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or they was inducted. But Green Day, Nirvana, even I think Merlin Manson should get in there as well. Merlin Manson should get in there as well, alongside some a few rock bands as well.
Yeah, and that would definitely be interesting. It would definitely be a fun, because then I feel like you get more people acknowledged, plain and simple to that point. Like you could put together genres, put together a whole list of guys that could go in, like hip hop, 90s, obviously Wu-Tang, Jay-Z, Nas,
Notorious B.I.G., Pac, Tupac.
Yep, exactly.
You can name every rapper from the 90s, and I'll still listen to them. Now, this year celebrates 30 years of Tupac's death. Remember that Las Vegas incident that happened after that Tyson fight?
Yep,
and then ultimately he was killed in a drive-by, which is why this year we will honor his death on Everything on the Table or NFL Pick'ems come September. But I will say this: Tupac was born in Harlem but raised in Oakland over time.
And he was a big contributor to that East Coast, West Coast rivalry, which was a huge draw in mainstream music throughout the mid to late 90s.
Now, for those who know that this year celebrates 30 years, let's talk about what's happening 30 years of this year's, 30 and 20 years actually, of 96 and 2006. Space Jam, 1996, with Jordan and, of course, the Looney Tunes. You had the Yankees winning the 96 World Series, the Chicago Bulls winning the 96 NBA Finals, the Packers winning the 96 Super Bowl, the Red Wings won the the Avalanche won the 96 Stanley Cup Finals. 2006, we have 20 years of 2006. We had the Cardinals winning the World Series for the first time since 1982, 2006.
The Miami Heat, Dwayne Wade got his first ring.
2006.
The Carolina Hurricanes got the Stanley Cup.
Their Stanley Cup, 2006.
Against an 8 seed that made it in the Edmonton Oilers. And then the Indianapolis Colts, Peyton Manning and Tony Dungy, one of the best QB and head coach duos, finally got their moment in the sun.
Yep. Higurashi When They Cry, 2006. Death Note, I think Death Note was part of 2006 as well. Now, I'm an anime fan to keep in mind, but Dragon Ball Z celebrates 30 years of 96 all the way to 2026. Now, a lot of people have been saying that which anime is best. Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, or of course Demon Slayer. Now, a lot of people's been saying that Dragon Ball Z is goated. I agree with. But ultimately, I got Dragon Ball Z because it did debut for the English dub in '96. Now, Higurashi When They Cry started in 2006. It was only lasted one season because Expansion 07 eventually went to dub for other seasons like in 2007 and onwards until 2020. But I think I know why. It was considered one of the most horror animes in the mid 2000s. Now, you can argue and say Death Note too, but I think Higurashi When They Cry was another one too. So I'm going to say that Death Note and Higurashi are both my top two horror animes. I could also add Chainsaw Man too, but I would not. But ultimately, 2006 is the year that a lot of things happened. Oh yeah, did I also mention the college football between the Longhorns winning that championship in 2006?
Yep, probably considered by many the greatest and certainly most memorable Rose Bowl of all time. You had Texas led by Vince Young, USC, Reggie Bush, YouTube's first viral athlete, and then Matt Leinart, who played a key role in a former starter turned backup turned starter, leading a Cinderella run a few years later, but that's another subject for another time.
Yep. And then ultimately, you guessed it, Jay-Z released a new album in 2006, Kingdom Come. That celebrates 20 years this year. Thank you all for watching. I know this is very short, but I think, to be honest with you, next week, we have a lot to talk about in terms of the Final Four, the Elite Eight, and of course, the recap of the first week of baseball season. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Agent Warrior X. Goodbye, my friends.
All right, so, yep, thank you for tuning in. Nikki Stees, Agent Warrior X, out until next week. Hasta la vista.